Okay, and I'm back. So we were talking yeast. Yeast are living organisms. If they're active dry yeast, they're not alive. You need to actually bring them to life. The one thing about yeast that yeast does not like or will kill yeast is if your liquid is too hot. Yeast likes lukewarm temperatures. It does not like hot or overly hot. So never put your yeast in boiling water or even boiling milk. And what I always tell people who have never done anything remotely with yeast is there is a trick, and it's not a big trick. Once you master the hang of it, it can be a little overwhelming. Yeast, the first time when I did yeast, I was petrified of doing it because you can really mess up the yeast. You can kill yeast very quickly. Before you measure anything out, if you have doubts, get your yeast going before you start measuring out your ingredients. There's nothing like measuring out all of your ingredients and then finding out that your yeast is not going to activate itself. It's going to die. And then you find out you don't have yeast and have to run to the store to get more yeast. So what I do to start this recipe is I'm going to grab our measuring cups. And this particular recipe is calling for 2.5 cups of milk. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to actually move you guys down so you can see this. This is going to get our yeast started. And I've got the milk. Okay, I've got a 2-cup measuring cup right here. I'm just going to pour 2 cups of milk. And I'm going to put this off to the side. You can do this ahead of time. Let your milk get more to a room temperature. I don't have the time to do that today, so I'm going to speed this up because it is a little bit late. So, now what we're going to do is we're going to activate our yeast. And I'm going to move you guys down again. So, I have a 4-cup measuring cup. But what I'm going to do with the 4-cup is I'm going to pour I'm going to put about a little bit more than a 1/2 cup in it. Of milk, of just milk. All I have in here is milk. I'm going to put this in the microwave and I'm going to let it warm up for about 1 minute. I'm going to grab my sugar over here. The other thing with yeast is yeast needs sugar to become active and to feed upon. That's been about 30 seconds. And my milk is lukewarm, so I'm going to stop that. If you can't stick your finger when you put your finger in, if you pull your finger right out, your milk is too hot, you need to cool it down a little bit. You could add a little bit of cold milk to it. Don't add too much cold milk because you just want the temperature of your milk to cool down just enough that it's not going to kill your yeast. So I'm going to say that again. And I'm going to move you guys again. And sorry to keep bouncing you guys back and forth. If you cannot put your finger in and keep it there, if you pull back, if you're not able to do this, and have to pull your finger right out, then your milk is going to be too warm, or your liquid. You could also do this with water, not for this recipe, but some ingredients with breads especially, don't necessarily have milk. They sometimes use water. If you can't leave your finger in there for more than 10 seconds, your milk is going to be too hot and you're going to end up killing your yeast. So, if that happens, all you need to do is add a little tiny bit of cold milk to the mixture if you can't hold your finger in. Just add enough to where you can hold your finger in for a good period of time. And a good period of time is 10 to 15 seconds. Once you can do that, then you know that your mixture is warm enough for the yeast to survive, but not hot enough for the yeast to be killed. So, what you're going to do then is you're going to take your yeast. Now this recipe is going to use, we're going to be using the fresh yeast. And the fresh yeast you can get, I would say you could get that pretty much at any grocery store. Sometimes it is very hard to find it. Always ask your supermarket if they carry fresh yeast. If they tell you it's in the baking aisle, you need to tell them that's not fresh yeast, that's dry yeast. Fresh yeast needs to be kept refrigerated and will always be in a refrigerated section. My local Jewel here in Illinois carries fresh yeast when they get it in by the eggs. Some grocery stores will carry it by the cheeses. Some will carry it by the prepackaged doughs, like your Pillsbury Grand Crescent rolls, those kinds. Sometimes you'll find yeast there. Sometimes you'll find it by the yogurt. It just depends. So this recipe calls for 1 small cake of yeast. So what I do is I cut this in half. And that's half of the yeast. I'm going to pull you guys in a little bit closer so you can see this. I'm going to try to do this. I'm going to actually put that in. And what you want to do, instead of just plopping this in, you just want to crumble it. And you can see the yeast dropping. And when I say crumble, you're crumbling it like that. You want to get all of your yeast in here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a fork and I'm just going to mix it in here. And you just want to incorporate or get the yeast smooth so that it's not still in clumps. Sometimes you can whisk it. And you just want it to melt into your milk mixture. And that pretty much, well, I still have a little bit. Actually, I'm going to whisk it. Let me get my small whisk and I'm just gonna whisk it in, and I'm going to do 1 tablespoon of granulated sugar. And that's just going to feed our yeast. A little bit more in there. And you could even add a pinch of salt. Now, what you want to do with the mixture is you want to put it somewhere warm. I have my oven. I just put my oven on 350, and I'm just going to put it in the back of the stove. So I'm going to show you what I did. I put my oven on 350. You don't have to go that hot. You're actually not going to use the oven. But this just will give the yeast a warm place to chill out to start activating. Now, what you're going to want to do with your fresh yeast is you're going to want to recover it and put it back in the refrigerator because, like I said, fresh yeast needs to be kept in the refrigerator, otherwise it will die. Your active dry yeast, however, does not need to be in the refrigerator. You can leave your active dry yeast out and in an airtight container. Oh, let me move you guys over. I'm going to do a little bit of cleaning. I spilled a little bit of sugar. So what you want to do once you get your yeast in the mixture is give it about 5 minutes to activate. And within that 5 minutes, you will know right away whether or not your yeast is going to be active or if it's not going to be active. If it's not active, chances are you have a bad yeast and you need to have fresher yeast. And I'm just going to look at the bottom and see what our yeast does. Put that a little bit over. Now, I have multiple yeasts, so I'm not worried about yeast being active. Unfortunately, the butter should be softened for this recipe and not hard. I'm reading the ingredients. This card is not the original recipe. So I'm going to stop you. You're 11 minutes in right now. I'll pick you right back up in a few seconds. Okay, I'm back. I just had to consult my book and I thought I had the main... I thought I had my Bubby's main recipe. Apparently I don't. This is how it was written out, so it's a little bit tricky, but yes, you do need to soften the butter. And what we're going to do is we're going to do that right now. I'm going to bring you over here for a second. And I'm just going to grab a small plate to soften. And you don't want the butter to melt. You just want it to soften. So I'm going to stick it in the microwave for about 30 seconds. And it's only been a couple of minutes and you're already seeing my yeast becoming active. You see how those pieces are floating, and hopefully you're getting this. I'm trying to angle. That's what you want your yeast to do. That's telling me my yeast is actually active and it is working. So if your yeast does that, that is fantastic. That means that now you can go ahead and you can measure out all of your ingredients and start to make the donuts. So I'm going to put you guys back here for a minute. I did soften the butter a little bit too hard. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to have to do some fast moving. Because I was not necessarily planning on making donuts today. And I'm just getting our measuring cups out. I think I'm going to use that one. It's in there. I'm going to stop you guys for a second and I'll pick this right back up.